Sometimes I feel pretty clever, and sometimes not so much. Welcome to Lancaster Hi-Fi. I'm Stephen Lancaster. Got a bit of an allergy or head cold thing going. If it's an allergy thing, it's just that time of year, everything's in bloom. If it's a head cold thing, I gotta blame my son, who got it because he teaches little kids parkour lessons. And I gotta go take a bunch of college and graduate students into the field tomorrow morning. Hope I feel a little better then. Man, I fix some stuff. And sometimes I'm pretty clever about it. I figure out pretty quickly what's wrong and nail it. For example, when I fixed the Sansui 881, there were just two fusible resistors in the whole thing that were in the power supply chain that were causing it to not produce any sound. Not any sound at all, and then not any phono sound. And it was pretty easy, both channels are out. It's got to be the power supply. Just the phono's out, but both channels of the phono are out. Got to be the power supply. I mean, typically. Well, a while back, a guy brought me a Pioneer SX1050 to repair. He hadn't paid as much for his SX1050 as you see them often going for. I think he said he paid $700 for it, which would have been a lot of money for something that didn't work, but it did work when he got it. But pretty quickly it didn't. And it didn't work in dramatic fashion. Smoke came out and it stopped making sound out of one channel. Or maybe both channels, if it went into protection. Well, it turned out it was one channel that was the problem. And it didn't take me that long to figure out that the power transistors, or at least two of the output power transistors on the right channel, had shorted. And so I replaced all of them because that's just sort of if you're going to replace some, might as well replace all, really. You get to redo the thermal paste with new thermal paste. You get to, just make sure everything's shipshape and that all the transistors match and that they're new and not worn out. But after replacing all the output transistors, it still didn't work. Now, one problem was easy to fix and was, that was pretty boneheaded. But that was just a mistake that I had made and just needed to fix. But the other thing, again, came down to two simple components that had failed when the transistors had shorted because they had received too much current and they had burned out. But finding those components took me friggin' forever. Once I knew they had failed, I could look at them and sort of see, oh yeah, I can see where that sort of burned out. But it wasn't obvious at all. I've seen a lot more discoloration on components that haven't failed. And I'm being a little obtuse because I don't want to give away the ending. But when I'm editing that video, I'm just going, oh my God, come on, figure it out. Jesus, figure it out. It's just painful. I've got another amp, or I've got an amplifier, Kenwood amplifier, sitting on my bench now, and I cannot figure out what is making it go haywire. It's got these power pack output modules that are known to fail and be a kind of a pain to replace when they do fail. But it doesn't seem to be the module that's the problem. But I can't figure out what the problem is. And it's kind of driving me nuts. It's like, God damn, can I just figure this out? And when this happens, I typically I go in and I replace a bunch of components, just trying to isolate where is the problem. Because I don't know, maybe I'm just not that smart when it comes to electronics. I'm really not all that brilliant when it comes to figuring out electronic circuits. I can read a schematic, I know what components what. I know basically what these components do and what an amplifier circuit looks like and so on. I can build a mean power supply because those are pretty simple. But figuring out what exactly is gone wrong with one of these failing power amplifiers, man, it can be a real bear. It makes me feel kind of stupid, or at least just not so clever. It makes me wonder whether somebody with a bit more just aptitude for understanding electronic circuits could get these things done really quickly. Self-doubt, right? I mean, I can usually end up fixing an electronic thing. But not everything. There's not everything that I can fix. But a lot of times, when I can fix it, it's just friggin' sheer stubbornness that I don't give up. Sometimes I get lucky or clever, and I am learning as I fix more things. But man, not fast enough. I mean, I'm learning, once I spot problems that are similar to problems that I've solved in the past, then, that maybe that next time it doesn't take me as long. But that's not what it's feeling like right now. This is like the third or fourth time I've been trying to fix one channel of an output stage or a power amplifier stage that is just going nuts and not doing what it's supposed to do, and I'm having a bear of a time figuring it out. But at least it's fixable. The thing that worries me about this Kenwood is that even though I seem to have diagnosed the fact that it's not the power pack whatever module that's failed, I'm not so sure. Because it seems like I've replaced and checked and or replaced the things that are most likely to be causing the sort of failure that I'm seeing. And I'm just not having any luck. It's just not coming together. Kind of driving me a little nuts. Man, what's the point? I haven't even decided whether this is a standalone video or just an introduction to my repair of the Pioneer SX1050. The Pioneer, I felt like I had to figure it out. I was getting paid to fix that. I didn't charge for all the time that I spent on that because some of the time that I spent on it was chasing down my own mistake. So I didn't charge for that, but I did still charge for all the time that it took to figure out the thing that wasn't my fault. Maybe that's what I want to harp on. I replaced some pretty expensive components in that SX1050. Replaced all the output transistors, and those weren't cheap. I replaced both of the big filter capacitors, and those were like $50 each. But those last components that took me forever to figure out what they were and what had failed, They weren't super cheap. We're not talking like 10-cent components, but more like $1 a piece. And my repair bill was just over $1,000. That's including all the parts. It's not all labor, but the biggest part of it by far is labor. Now, what if it had just been those $2 a piece components? It still would have taken me quite a lot of time. You know, it wouldn't have been $1,000 repair bill, but it would have been still not cheap to figure out what was wrong and fix it. There was a big deal made lately about a phono preamp that got sent to the Fix-It guy on YouTube, and I'm blanking on his name because I don't watch his channel that often. I enjoy his videos when I do, and there was a bit of a hoopla about how the company that made the phono preamp was going to charge a lot of money to fix it. And then once this guy figured out what was wrong with it, other than it getting kind of semi-destroyed in shipping, and that wasn't a cheap fix, I don't think. I mean, it was a lot of labor and materials on his part to fix that. But the electronic failure came down to, you know, one or two inexpensive components, you know, probably each costing $1 or less. And so there was this big thing, you know, they wanted to charge, you know, $5,000, $10,000, whatever it was. It was more than $1,000 to fix a phono preamp when the parts needing replacing, the broken components, were only like $1 each. And this was somehow scandalous. Now, I don't know whether they ought to have quoted such a high price, but I also don't think they were trying to gouge anybody. You know, repair techs, skilled, serious, professional repair techs, don't work cheap. Because they shouldn't, because they're highly skilled. Among repair techs, I work at a relatively cheap hourly rate because I just don't think I'm good enough to charge a higher rate. But it can take a good amount of time to figure out what's wrong with a complicated piece of electronics. And that time isn't free. If that company that made the preamp, if they're paying a technician to do the repair, they don't get to just pay him to replace those two broken components, if that's what it was. And that only took, 5 minutes, blah, blah, blah. No, they got to pay him to figure it out. And that can take a lot of time. Now, if I were seriously clever, if I were as smart as some people maybe think I am, then maybe it wouldn't take me so long, but I'd also charge more. And so it would still cost a lot of money. It's just going to cost a fair amount of money for any skilled technician to figure out what's wrong with something and fix it. Hell, just dismantling a piece of electronics in order to get to the thing that needs fixing, never mind figuring out what the thing is that needs fixing, but just doing the dismantling to get the access to that component, that could take an hour. Golly, Stephen, aren't you so practiced at this stuff that Haven't you learned tricks? Doesn't it just take you less time than it would anybody else? No. No, it might take me more time because I'm super friggin' careful not to lose anything, to put all the nuts and bolts and screws and whatnot, to take pictures as I go so I don't forget what goes where when I have to put it back together. No, there's no hurrying that. I mean, obviously after I take the same piece of gear apart a few times and put it back together a few times, it gets a bit faster. But not by a huge amount. I mean, at least I don't have to sit and figure out how to get it apart the second and third, or actually maybe the second time I do still have to figure it out because it's been a while since I took it apart previously. If I had to put it back together and order some parts and then wait for it to sort of come back to the place on the bench, it could be a while. And maybe I've forgotten exactly how to take that bit of it apart, or how exactly I did it last time. Or maybe I decide later that the way I did it last time really was not the best way to do it. Disassembling and reassembling right there could take a couple of hours. And then once you do that, if you knew exactly what component it was you were going to replace, then that's pretty fast. But that's a big if. I don't usually know exactly what I'm going to need to replace. I'm looking at the circuit diagram. I'm trying to figure out, it's doing this thing. Why? Why is it doing it? I'm looking at threads on Audio Karma. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm replacing components to see if that fixes the problem. The thing is, though, it's, sometimes it ends up being a bit of a shotgun approach. Because reassembling even to the point where you can just turn it on to see if it works, it's pretty time consuming. So, replace one 10-cent component, put it all back together, see if it works. It doesn't work. Take it all back apart, replace another 10-cent component that it could be. So I usually end up replacing way more components than need to be replaced, probably. Yeah, typically a lot. Typically I'll replace a lot of transistors, and in the Pioneer SX1050, I replaced a bunch of transistors in that thing before I finally figured out what was wrong, other than the original output transistor failure. Yeah, figuring out which relatively cheap component failed, man. And of course, they weren't cheap enough components that they were the sort that I just have a regular, keep a stock of them on hand. $1 a piece is kind of expensive for electronic components still. And those of you who are clever about these things, that might give you a clue as to what component it was that did fail. And I'm not going to tell you now. You're going to have to wait to find out. Or watch the video, if this is a separate video. But yeah, that kind of bugged me that gosh, it was only a 10-cent component. It was only a $1 component that needed to be replaced. Presto changeo. It's like, yeah, but is it Mike to fix it? Fix it, Mike? I don't know. Anyway, he's a super clever guy. I mean, I think he's probably way more clever than I am about electronic circuits. Has a greater repertoire of understanding of different electronic circuits. He's more clever than I am. I think. He's a pretty clever guy. At least in the video, it seemed like he figured out pretty quickly what was wrong. Not super quickly, but pretty systematically narrowed in on the problem and figured it out. I don't feel like I'm always so super systematic and about it. I don't know, maybe it's a matter of experience. Maybe it's just like there's still some level on which I just don't get electronic circuits. I just am still not all that great at reading what's supposed to be going on. And therefore, when a certain type of failure occurs, what must be the problem? I mean, I still feel like a lot of time I'm winging it. And that still puts me in a much more knowledgeable and skilled position than, somebody who doesn't fix anything at all. But, man, I've had a few things trying to fix lately that just not made me feel too awfully smart. But again, I come back to when you're paying somebody to fix a thing for you, you need to understand what you're paying for. And I think people have been kind of spoiled by auto mechanics because cars are so complicated that they have computers in them now. And so you can essentially plug a modern car into a computer and it will tell you what's wrong with it. And then you look, and then you order the part and you look up how much time it takes to replace that part and you charge that amount of money and you're done. Stereo gear is not like that. These old vintage pieces don't have diagnostic computers in them. You can't plug this into a thing and have it tell you what's wrong. You got to look at the circuit, look at the circuit board, and figure it out. And it can take quite a while. That Sansui 881, for which I only needed to replace 2 cheap resistors to fix it. And there we were talking like 10-cent components. That still took a while to figure out. I mean, it probably took several hours. If that had been a for pay repair job, we'd still be talking, I want to say it took me like 5 hours. So at my relatively modest rate, that, I only charged $30 an hour. That would have been $150 to replace 2 10-cent components. Yeah. I don't know. It seems like some people harp on that kind of thing. It's just 2 10-cent components. What if I had charged more? What if that had been a for hire repair and I had charged more? What if I charged $50 an hour or $100 an hour or $200 an hour? Because I don't think those are unreasonable rates for skilled technicians these days. Let's say I was a $200 an hour technician, and I feel like I was pretty clever in tracking down the problems in that unit. Maybe I could have been a little more clever. Say it only took me 3 hours instead of 5. It's still $600 at a $200 an hour labor rate. So I think, what is this about? Sounds like this video is about, Dolly, does it really cost that much? How could it cost that much to change a 10-cent component? Sorry if I'm kind of taking the piss. If that's a position you might have held at some point, but dude, figuring out which of the friggin' umpty million 10-cent components in a unit need to be replaced. I mean, it's not like you can just go in and like there's a sign pointing at this one needs to be replaced. I mean, sometimes the components that fail do kind of burn up in dramatic fashion and thereby signal their presence and make themselves obvious, but most of the time they don't. Most failed shorted transistors look exactly like good transistors. Most failed resistors look just like good resistors. Most failed capacitors look just like good capacitors. With that Pioneer, I was at least clued into the problem by where did the smoke come from? Well, I think that's maybe enough ranting for now. So Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, please, if you liked the video. Hey, give it a thumbs up as well. Leave me a comment. You can leave a snarky comment if you want to. I'll just, whatever. Have a good one, y'all. I'll talk to you later.